Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Dr. Shayna Keller, and today we have a special guest, Dr. Sahar Naghibi. She's also a naturopathic doctor, and I'll let her introduce herself here in a moment. But we were chatting a couple weeks ago about, what we were going to talk about on this episode. And some of the things that were really resonating with us are the philosophy that brings someone to come to see a naturopathic doctor. When you sit in a visit with us, it's not just getting a pill or a treatment plan. There's so much more that goes into it. So we're wanting to investigate a little bit more on that. And one of those ways that help us is understanding archetypes. And there's various forms of archetypal energy. So we're going to dive into that a little bit. The importance of connection. And connection is a very broad term, so stay tuned because we're going to dig in a little bit. And where is the nature in naturopathic medicine? And does traditional naturopathy versus modern naturopathy actually matter? And in my opinion, back to the basics, I have seen some pretty magical things happen. Not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there's a time and a place for all the things. But when we forget that the important things that connect us to the earth as human beings, we start to see some dysfunction. So Sahar, can you introduce yourself and let our guests know who you are and what makes you special?
Sure. Hello, I am Sahar Naghibi. I'm a naturopathic physician. I'm currently practicing in Seattle, Washington. And I practice Vitalistic, what some might call traditional naturopathic medicine. And I graduated from Bastyr University. Thank you for having me here today, Shayna. I am excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad to get to chat with you about this. And, one of the things that stuck out about our phone call that I thought was really interesting and a good reminder is knowing ourself and knowing when we're sitting with someone, is that ours or is that theirs? And kind of how do we parse that out? And what I mean by that is like, have you ever sat with someone that's like really profoundly anxious and now you're starting to feel anxious? It's like, okay, hold on. When I entered this room for this conversation, I wasn't feeling anxiety. And now I'm picking up on this other person's energy, and maybe they're sitting kind of calmly in the chair, but like it's the way they're saying their words, the tone that they're using, the pace that they're speaking in. Those are all ways that we use as naturopathic doctors to help us say, hey, like what's going on here? What are we missing? Because maybe they didn't have a diagnosis. And it's not even about finding the diagnosis necessarily, but sometimes our demeanor, and to use Dr. Charlie Cropley's like thoughts on some of this, is are there any behaviors and habits that we are having that are contributing to our ill health? And maybe we're not aware of them. They're unconscious.
Yeah, that's really good, Shayna. I think something happens as naturopaths when we're in a visit for 60 minutes, or in my case, I spend 90 minutes with the first patient.
Me too.
A lot comes out. That's different than when you're in urgent care and you're like 5-10 minutes with a patient. They come in with a broken bone, they have a serious infection. It's just like transactional. And so I think when you spend enough time with a person, whether it's physician and patient or two friends or love, whatever it is, things come out in 60 and 90 minutes. And to be able to know yourself enough to be like, what is the patient's and what is mine is really important in order to see the truth of the state of health that's in front of you.
Yeah.
And that takes work.
It sure does take work. And this is why like conventional practitioners are often told, hey, keep that separation. Don't become emotionally involved with your patients. And there's a medical doctor here in town I've befriended, and she struck out on her own cash pay practice. And she joked when I was like, oh yeah, us naturopathic doctors are trying to get covered under Medicare. She's like, you don't want that because of the headache that comes with it and the shackles that come with the insurance companies. But her whole thing is like she was educated to be disconnected from her patients. And really the power, I think, of some of the longer form conversations really to unearth, this thing that happened to you 30 years ago that you're still thinking about today is having a profound impact on you. And we wouldn't have been able to figure that out in a 5-minute appointment. Hey, you talked about urgent care. That's great. I want those transactional appointments. Like, quickly you're getting my compound fracture, my bone sticking out of my leg, and I'm getting to surgery. I want that. I want transactional.
Yeah,
yes,
I want that doctor.
So
I don't want a doctor talking about emotions when I'm in an emergency situation.
We can deal with the aftermath of how I broke my leg another time, but first fix it so I don't have sepsis and so I can keep walking later or keep snowboarding, because I imagine it would be a snowboard accident, right?
Yeah.
But with chronic illness, the way that it is, it's like 1 in a quarter kids, 1 in a quarter minors have chronic illness. What is like 2/3 of Americans have at least one chronic illness. 66% of pharmaceuticals are consumed in the United States, and we're 1 billion people less than China and India. How is that even freaking possible? Obviously, we're not deficient in medications. We're deficient in something else. And I guess that's the question, is like, what do you think we're deficient in?
Oh, what do I think we're deficient in? Connection. I think that's a big one. Mm-hmm. Connection to self, connection to community, connection to our food source, connection to our bodies. I think the lack of connection is a big contributing factor to a lot of disease. And I think something that comes out in that patient physician visit is, where is that lack of connection, you know? Mm-hmm. And, you know, going back to your concept of archetypes and Jungian psychology, we have the persona, right? Which is the mask that we wear to the outer world, how we want people to view us. We have our shadow self, which is our hidden, deep, regressed self. And then we have like the true self, the true integrated, balanced self. And I think something that's important in being a naturopathic physician is really understanding, coming back to your concept of knowing yourself. You have to understand what your own true self is, what your own integrated self is, whatever that looks like for you, so that you can then help a patient work through that and get to their own true self. Because it's like, a patient comes to you, and what's your end goal? Is your end goal to just treat the respiratory infection? Is your end goal to just treat their chronic disease? Yeah, I mean, those are great. But and what? To treat their chronic condition so they're healthy, and what? So that their lab values are normal?
Right.
No, it's like, we want to get people to get to an equilibrium, and what? And to what? And to feel whole, to feel connected, to be able to go out into the world and be their true integrated self, to reach their potential. And I think it's only when you yourself have done that and gone through that, that you can then help others through that process, you know? Right. So that lack of connection to the self, you know, then we're not able to really understand, like, are we in pain? What is our eating habits like? What is the lack of sense, like the lack of sense to community and the lack of sense to the world around you can create a lot of emotional conditions, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, which then we know impacts our GI tract, which then can lead to all types of chronic conditions because we're not absorbing our nutrients. So it's like, where do we begin? It's like, connection is probably a good starting point, and connection to the self is the first step.
It is a good first step. I'm not sure what you've seen clinically, but it's so ironic to me that we are hyper-connected. I can talk to my friend that I met 12 years ago in New Zealand, and I can just shoot him a message online. And I can stay connected to him even though I haven't seen him in 12 years. And I love that, although I don't have that same immediate relationship as when I was in New Zealand, spending time with him, getting to know him on a more personal level, right? So we're hyper-connected. We stay connected to people we went to high school with, middle school with, maybe even family members we don't really want to stay connected with, other people from previous communities, previous lives, previous jobs, whatever. So we're hyper-connected to people that traditionally we would have lost connections with, so that we would have been able to make a new connection with maybe someone that was more healthy for us, or brought a little more joy, or brought us more lessons. You know, not everything has to be happy and butterflies and rainbows, right? Like, there's lots of ways we can learn and grow with our connections, with our community. I often think of community when I think of connections. And so many people are lonely. They live by themselves. They cook by themselves, and that makes eating not as enjoyable because we are social creatures, maybe not social to the same degree bees are. But we are social creatures by nature. We are meant to be in community, communing with each other, learning and growing together. And, you know, you talked about anxiety and depression, and with those being as prevalent as they are, especially amongst adults, with suicide being one of the biggest contributors to adult white males losing their life today in the United States, we spend so much time here. I'm thinking about my pain. I'm thinking about my suffering. What about feeling it? Like, what does it feel like? Do you feel a heaviness in your chest? Do you feel like twisted stomach when you think about that thing that happened? Or do you just, I'm thinking about feeling, which I find this is very clinically far more common than actually someone that can be dropped in and feel their feelings. What about you?
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think I would question that concept of we're in a hyper-connected state. I think our ways of transpersonal communication is increased. We're able to send the message and it can go anywhere across the world, but that communication it's 2D. It's not even 3D, you know?
Right?
That's something different than when you have not seen a friend for a long time and they're sitting across from you in the couch and you're making eye contact and you have these belly laughs and there's something that's happening in conversation and maybe energy fields. And that's a kind of connection that's beyond just this. That's like heart-brain coherence.
Yeah.
And I think we have all this like synthetic communication. It's like, you don't even know what's real anymore. My best friend's Facebook just got hacked. And this person changed their profile picture. And this morning they uploaded this certificate and they were like, hello, friends and family. I am now cybersecurity certified. Come to me for all your cyber concern. And they're like a shell of a person.
Right.
And people are like commenting and liking, thinking that's really the friend, but it's like it's all fake, you know. And I'm grateful like we're able to be through our computers. I'm in Seattle and you're in Colorado. Like we're able to do these things and they're wonderful. But you know, maybe something different would be happening if you were sitting right there and we were sharing a cup of tea, you know?
Exactly. That is one thing I find detrimental about virtual visits. And I will do them periodically. I have patients that will come see me 2 hours away. Okay, once we've had the initial visit and I've done physical exam, I feel comfortable doing virtual. Energetically, I feel different than when I'm sitting with a patient in person.
Absolutely.
It feels more effort on my part to sit with them and be with them than it does to be on the phone or be on a video. So there is definitely something that's happening there that's a two-way street that I'm not worried about AI taking my job. Maybe the primary care physician that's doing algorithmic medicine, sure, you don't need a fancy degree to look at a flow chart and say, oh, you have sore throat. Do you have this symptom or do you have this symptom? Okay, those symptoms, great. We're going to go down this path. Great. Then this is the medication you're going to get prescribed. And if that doesn't work, then we're going to do this, right? You don't need a fancy degree to like follow a flow chart. That my question is, who made that flow chart? Was it the doctor or was it the insurance company? You know?
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms.
It sure is a whole nother can of worms.
Who runs Up to Date, but the mafia. But to kind of come back to the clinical aspect of it, to your question, it's like, okay, so patients are disconnected to themselves. You know, I have patients who haven't slept right, haven't had a right bowel movement in a long time, are living alone, are getting synthetic food from a store. They're just like, everything is so disconnected. And so it's easy to just say that. It's easy to get cynical and be like, we're disconnected from the farms and from our medicines and from community. But it's like, I'm also really curious and interested in like tangible ways we can get people to get back to connection, reconnecting. And I think in a lot of ways, our medicine is that vehicle. Our medicine is that vehicle. It's like, I think in talking about the inherent principles of our medicine, we can answer this question of like, one thing that I feel like helps reconnect people to themselves and their health is reconnecting to nature. And this is something me and you have talked about. It's like in our name of our medicine is naturopathic medicine. So where's the nature in that? Like, what does that mean? And in answering that, I've kind of come to a conclusion of how to help patients get reacquainted with themselves and their bodies. So I can go down that whole rabbit hole if you'd like me to.
Well, what I like about this is, a neuroscientist, medical doctor, or excuse me, he's an OD, he's an eye doctor, Andrew Huberman, who runs the Huberman Show, teaches at Stanford. He validates the hell out of naturopathic medicine constantly. And I love his podcast for that. Two things: grounding, aka earthing, and circadian rhythm balancing, i.e. getting your eyes and your skin unencumbered from sunblock, sunglasses, hats, long sleeve clothing. Get your skin, get your eyeballs out the sun. And I'm not saying you need to go like sun gaze, not necessarily to that degree, but do you need to wear your sunglasses 24/7? That's actually a sign that you have adrenal dysfunction. That's HPA axis, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is upset. And who isn't stressed out? I have 10-year-old kids that I see that are stressed to an nth degree. And it's so sad to see like little kids who should be making mud pies worried about whatever is going on in the world. And I'm not saying kids should be sheltered, but those are the basic things that bring people back into balance of themselves. I've seen them be very, very beneficial. Also, prioritizing different ways of eating, like making sure you're eating actually macros and not, just ultra processed food all the time. Bringing that connection back to the simple things. So I do think it would be worthwhile to go down that path, because there's ample data now that shows that circadian rhythm and grounding have a hell of a lot of benefit to bringing a human back into our balance. We are electrical creatures, whether we want it to be or not. How does an EKG work if we're not electrical creatures? Energetic, electrical, same. We can just use a less controversial word and say that we're electrical.
Right. And it's so interesting. It's like we're in this time period between the old ways and the new ways. And it's like we're almost using these new ways, these new research paradigms to explain how the old ways were effective and efficient for our ancestors who would walk around barefoot and they would pick up those negative ions. They would get that antioxidant advantage. They would look in the sun when they were outside. They were looking at the sun. They were looking at their ecosystem.
Can you tell us what a negative ion is compared to a positive ion? Because I find a lot of people have a hard time with this concept.
Okay, yeah, sure. So let's start with the concept of free radicals. In our body, there's a lot of charges. And so when you have an unbalanced negative charge in your body, it's an unpaired electron. So it's going around and it's wrecking havoc, essentially. It's running around in your body and it's causing inflammation. Increased free radicals, they cause inflammation, they cause aging, they can lead to different cancers, inflammations, etc. And so this negative ion is simply looking for another electron to pair with it to become stable. So how do we do this? One way is by consuming antioxidants. And so what antioxidants, like a berry, has is it has an abundance of a negative ion in it. So when you eat it, that negative ion from your food pairs with this negative ion free radical in your body that's unstable, and they come together and they stabilize. So when we're walking around and we're doing earthing, a similar concept is happening. We're picking up a negative ion from the earth, a negative charge, and it goes from the ground, from the earth, into the sole of our feet. It circulates into our body, and then it eventually pairs up with that other free radical in our body that's wrecking havoc, and it stabilizes. So it stops that free radical from oxidizing in the body and causing inflammation and causing aging. So it's antioxidant. So infrared light does this, grounding does this, eating antioxidant-rich foods does this. So yeah, that's the concept of earthing and antioxidants, essentially.
Yeah, positive and negative ions and the benefit there. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah. Just so
More or
people are on
less.
the same
More or
page.
less. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's like we're getting all of this modern day research to explain things we already knew.
We
There
already
is,
knew. And somehow,
yeah.
I'm always blown away, but like, how did we as humanity figure these things out prior to having all these quote unquote fancy technologies? Do we actually need the fancy technologies? Or, thinking about Eric Yarnell, who is one of our teachers, who's also an ND and a fantastic herbalist. I'm very grateful for my education from him. He would say things, what we do as naturopathic doctors is not sexy. Okay, we throw some herbs and we throw some homeopathy and we throw this and we throw that. And, it makes it fancy, but like really, we're talking nuts and bolts here. How are you moving your body? What's your community like? How are you sleeping? What's your nutrition like? What's your hydration like? These very basic foundational conversations that, I have people that don't even know. Like, I don't know how many times a day I go pee. I've never looked at my poop before, which maybe some people are more curious than others. That's an interesting thought as far as archetypal energy goes. Like, are those people tend to be a little more on the anxious disposition? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I love talking to all patients about their bowel movements and their poop and making them aware, making them
Yeah.
super aware, because that it teaches you about the laws of nature of your body, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like constipation is a really good example. It's like this body, it has an innate intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And so the basic premise of our medicine, for our viewers who might not know, is the Latin phrase, the vis medicatrix naturae. And so that is, let's define that. That's the healing power of nature. It's that there's an inherent self-organizing healing process in
Yeah.
living systems, which establishes, maintains, and restores health, right? And that exists in the human body
Mm-hmm.
according to naturopathic principles. So an example of this is, I'm chopping up some onions and I accidentally cut myself. And so I
Mm-hmm.
have a wound. So what's happening at the site of the wound, right? Platelets start forming. We start having inflammation to the cell. White blood cells come, our macrophages, they're eating up all the cell debris and foreign invaders. Then we start having some wound healing. We start having different proliferation of collagen and tissue. And eventually, like the wound heals. And even if you do
Mm-hmm.
nothing else, it
And what I
heals.
love about that is we don't have to think about any of that. Our body just does it. And that proves to me that we are innately healing creatures and we want to heal. The trouble is do we have the resources? Do we have the capacity? Thinking about some of my diabetic patients that have ulcers on their legs that aren't healing. Right now, their body doesn't have the capacity. And I go back to Lindlar's principles here, and I've summarized them so they're a little bit easier to understand from the 1900s language that he was using in his book, Nature Cure, to include give the body what it needs. So the body needs certain nutrients, it needs certain energy, whether that's sun, whether that's sleep, whatever. Give the body what it needs, help the body take out the trash, and get out the way. Get out the way. This is the problem most of the time, whether it's the practitioner and or the patient. Sometimes it can be both, or it could be a family member that's like, yeah, but you're sick. Yeah, but this. Yeah, but this. Or another doctor that says you have 6 months to live.
Right. Right. Exactly. These basic principles of nature. Um, I think what's also interesting is I spent a lot of time at Bastyr, trying to answer that question, like where is the nature in naturopathic medicine? And like you say, we don't even have to think about it when it happens to us, but there's examples of this mechanism that exist in the natural world. So we see it with trees, for example. When a tree has an infection, through the phloem and the xylem, it's going to ooze out sap, and that sap acts as like a scab, and it protects the tree wound from the outer elements, which is amazing. And more so thinking about like how plants actually heal, because plants don't have cell migration like animals do. Plants have rigid cell walls. So in Austria, it was the Science Institute of Technology. Some scientists were looking at plant healing, and they looked at the thale cress plant. It's like the Arabidopsis, Latin is name, and that's
Okay.
like the plant we use for the model organism in plant biology. And so
Okay.
they found that if they took a plant and they used a laser to wound the plant, the cells adjacent to the wound site released a phytohormone. Plants have hormones too, called auxin. And so that auxin would be released right adjacent to the wound site in the plant, and it would increase cellular division and proliferation, and it would up create essentially more cellular making. And so the increased cellular making essentially would bulge into the site of the wound. The increased cellular division would bulge into the site of the wound so that the newly created cells took the place of the hurt, the wounded cells. And in that way, plants also heal. And so it's like that is the intelligent design and the force and the inherent healing mechanism of nature that is the vis medicatrix naturae.
What about when the world shut down in March of 2020? I don't know about you, but Seattle became a lot more of a livable place. The pollution dropped substantially. The trees, I'm just like shocked at how the trees looked to me. They actually had like I don't know, then this is going to sound crazy, but like they have this, to me, what I saw on my commute that went from 45 minutes to 22 minutes, I saw the trees look brighter. They looked healthier to me. And you know, there was some all kinds of shenanigans going on online of like, oh, there was dolphins and this, but like creatures started to creep back into their rightful habitats because humans weren't overrunning it and driving too many cars and flying too many planes. Like Seattle became a very silent place. And I lived 45 minutes from the airport under the flight pattern. We heard airplanes and jets all day long, night and day. That was silent. How quickly the natural environment reclaims itself when it has the tools that it needs, and it helps to take out the trash. And pollution is trash. Our body naturally makes pollution just by functioning. Eating is inflammatory. Inflammation isn't necessarily the problem. It's the problem is when things become overrun and the body cannot do what it's normally meant to do. Your blood sugar is 500 and you're sitting at 500 and your A1C is 14.1 and your body's like, hold on a minute. Like I need to process all this extra blood sugar. What do I do with it? Yeah. How do I process it? So the body then starts to adapt and becomes a little more homeodynamic towards having a higher blood sugar. So when I work with patients that have really high blood sugars, I don't want to go from 500 to a 100, which is a normal blood sugar range. We got to gradually bring that down because their bodies become used to functioning with that higher amount of blood sugar. 500 is a very high number, by the way, to have a fasting blood sugar of that A1C of 14.1. But I have had patients that function that way and they don't have any end organ symptoms, eye damage, kidney damage, blood pressure issues. Like they are sitting here in my office like it was any other day, which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of, there's this wildlife conservation naturalist. His name's Paul Rosalie. He does a lot of work in the Amazon. And he was talking about, I'm going to get the animal wrong, but it was like this white Bengal tiger that was endangered for a long time. And so we were really worried about this endangered species. And he's like, it was really simple. We just got the humans to stop logging the areas. We started removing the humans, restoring the habitat. And now the animals' rates of like breeding and continuing on is at an all-time high. It's like all we need to do is restore the environment and it'll take care of itself. We just need to get out of the way. And I think that's a big, similar to what you're saying with your patient. It's like, you just got to figure out what the root cause is, restore the ecosystem. And then that intelligent design will like restore health. Hopefully.
Generally, that's how it works. I do, and I don't know about you, but definitely I've seen some complex cases that it's like we've got, 3 or 4 different things going on that are overlaying. And then where do we then start? Like, where's the thread that we start to pull so we can start to see some benefit in treatment? And, I feel like what we're talking about, I can hear the naysayers saying, hey, you guys are being idealistic. This is unrealistic, the expectations. We're talking about people that are really sick here. Yeah, unfortunately, us naturopathic doctors, we see very sick people that conventional medicine says, sorry, we don't have any more answers for you. You've been on the medications, you've had the surgeries, there's nothing left. I see some patients that look like shells of themselves in my office. And whether that's because of conventional treatments or a combination of them not knowing who they are anymore because they are so used to this, have been in the medical system for 10, 15 years, being sick on 10 medications, you can kind of see how we might end up here. And we haven't even talked about iatrogenicity or proper use of medications and procedures like surgeries and other treatments. An AGD is something I use regularly in my practice or refer out to get done. And that can have negative consequences when done appropriately without any, nothing went wrong, and it can still be a problem for the patient because we have to take into account the individual that's sitting in front of us and the individual biochemical needs, the individual weaknesses, like inherent weaknesses that each person may or may not have.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so on one end is really complex disease, but before we go there, let's start with a very simple example that will reflect our philosophy, and then let's take it to the most complex end of the spectrum. So if we start at point A and we say there's an intelligence to the way nature works, and our job as scientists and as naturopathic physicians is to try and make sense of the phenomenon of nature. Okay, so let's bring this back to health in a specific way. That intelligent design is working in the human body. So at rest, this body should be healthy.
Right.
And when it's not, we need to figure out what the cause of that disturbance is. So if we let a disturbance go on long enough, and long enough is a subjective term here because that's based on the sensitivity of the individual.
Absolutely.
And the biochemical needs of the individual, as you just noted. So let's agree that the concept of long enough is subjective, but let's go with it. If we let the disturbance go on for long enough, then we begin to express symptoms. So bringing it to the toxic bucket analogy. For the viewing audience who doesn't know, the toxic bucket analogy is a bucket that represents the total accumulation of the toxic burden in our bodies. And how much this bucket fills up is dependent on our exposure to new toxins, but also our body's effectiveness and efficiency of detoxification of the pre-existing toxic burden.
And where we start when we were born too. There's so many complexities, there's many pieces that go into this. But
exactly. And our genetic disposition and what we start with, the raw material. And so it's also dependent on our body's effectiveness of eliminating the toxic burden through our liver, through our kidneys, through urinating, through our skin, through sweating, through our GI tract, through eliminating. Okay. So by the time that this bucket overflows, that's when we start expressing symptoms.
Exactly.
And I want to get your opinion on this, Shayna, because I've been thinking about this, and I think that this point is the point of divergence in medicine.
Yeah.
So an example of this, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that a healthy individual should have at least one bowel movement a day, and it should be well-formed and easy to pass for the most part.
Yep.
Okay. So if there is going back to people who don't even have a sense of how often they're going to the bathroom or what it looks like, it's like training them to be aware of that, increasing awareness. So if there is a digestive disturbance, and that could be due to diet, environment, infection, etc., if we let that disturbance to the digestive system go long enough, the symptoms will manifest. Depends on the patient. It could be constipation, it could be diarrhea, it could be nausea, it could be bloating. So let's pick any one of those symptoms. Let's go with constipation because that's really common nowadays. You come to your doctor and you say, hey doc, I have this really bad constipation. And so bear with me. This is the point of divergence. In scenario one, your doctor can say, your issue is your constipation. And so I will give you medicine X. If you're a GI doctor, medicine X might be Metamucil. If you're
Miralax is what I was going to say.
Or Miralax.
Long-term Miralax for all the kids with constipation.
If you're a modern naturopath, medicine X might be aloe or senna.
Right.
So that's scenario one. In scenario two, the doctor can look at your issue of constipation and actually view it as a symptom that's a manifestation of a deeper disturbance. And it comes back to the vis medicatrix naturae, because you believe that the normal human physiology should be able to eat, drink, eliminate properly and regularly. And if they cannot, there's a disturbance in the system. It's like a law of physics. It's like
Right.
energy cannot be matter cannot be created or destroyed. It's like if it's going in, it's got to go out, and if not, it's staying in the gut and it's putrefying and it's causing toxic matter.
Mm-hmm.
So if in scenario 1 we view constipation as the disease that we're treating, because that's the symptom that we're observing, then that's standard reductionistic thinking.
Definitely.
As opposed to scenario 2, where now we're viewing constipation as a sign or a symptom of disturbance of that innate equilibrium of the intelligence of the body. So if that's your healing philosophy, then the next logical step before you prescribe any medication or any herb is to determine what the obstacle is and to remove it. That's impeding that inner intelligence. And in our example of impaired elimination, which is usually due to disturbed digestive function, is usually resolved by just identifying the dietary intolerance and making a couple corrections and giving some herbal medicine to support digestive functioning to return to a more optimal state. As opposed to scenario 1, where you're reductively treating the constipation. And what other choice are you left with there other than saying, I will give you medicine X to help you have a bowel movement. Right. But you must take, Sheena, every time you want a bowel movement, you must take medicine X because you're treating on that Newtonian model, right? The molecules in the medicine X are what the solution is, whether that's the soluble fiber in the psyllium husk, whether that's the senescide molecules in the senna, as opposed to the emphasis on this higher intelligence force of the body that knows what it needs to do with waste matter. It's like I don't know about you, but I don't want to give my patients a crutch every time they need to eliminate. It's frankly, but there is a time and a place. The intelligence
I agree with you. Yeah. Fully it is. It's an insult to the intelligence. And I made that comment earlier, I see some kiddos, and these kiddos are prescribed long-term Miralax, which is not considered safe for kids under 6. But it's being prescribed that way. That's really an interesting thought process. A lot of times, and I'm curious if you've seen this, constipation is emotional, especially someone that's been dealing with chronic constipation. Yeah, there can be food intolerances, and those things can clean up. But I also see patients that have a prim diet, they exercise, they drink enough water. So then what are we missing here? The emotional component hasn't been addressed. And in Chinese medicine, and I like to say I know enough to be dangerous, the colon is associated with grief, the element metal. And grief, constipation, you're stressed out, maybe your closest aunt died and it really triggered you. So my first question is, when someone comes in, new onset with a new symptom like constipation, is what happened 3 months ago? Oh, my aunt died. And it was really hard for me. And, her brothers were fighting about whatever. And I just really wanted her ring. And I couldn't even have a conversation or get a picture from her home. That is a scenario that all too often when someone passes, we hear. There's bickering over something instead of I just want this meaningful component, right?
Sure.
I wanted to have this meaningful end, and it didn't go the way that I would have liked it to. Sure. Okay. And then even just talking about it can unravel. And, I have prescribed on more than one occasion. When was the last time you had a good cry? A decade?
Dr. Shana makes her patients cry in office.
I try not to make them cry, but I know that I'm on the right path if I get them to cry.
It's a good release. Yeah.
Right. And I had a patient recently who, and I'm going to change details, and I do that generally when I talk about cases. That way people are not identifiable. Patient started a business, and patient doesn't think that them deciding to leave their full-time employed W-2 position had anything to do with their disrupted sleep. And I'm the more I talk to them, I'm there's the timeline that's coinciding with this is right around the time you made the internal decision to say, hey, at the end of this quarter, I'm going to quit my W-2 job and go full-time into my practice, into my business that I'm starting. And that's scary. You're betting on yourself. I was starting my own business. I lost sleep. There were many, many nights I lost sleep, many ideas, good ideas, bad ideas. What if I'm doing the wrong thing? Maybe I need to have another job. I should have done a residency, all these things, the monkey brain. And this person was like, oh, I think you're right. Like they were so concerned about the thing that was being disrupted that they didn't take a step to like pause, be the observer, think about what's going on. And just that alone settled them. And I follow up with them soon. So hopefully I'll hear how their sleep has been doing since that, just that making that awareness be known, bringing the conscious, bringing the unconscious conscious.
Oh my God. I love that. I love that. It's Joseph Campbell has this concept that I think about a lot that relates to what you're saying. It's a circle and there's a line through the circle. And all of us, our patients, ourselves, have this line. Above the line is the conscious, everything we're consciously aware of. And below the line is the dark unconscious, things that we've repressed, we have not brought into our conscious mind, let's say. And so all of the work is lowering that line and making the unconscious conscious. And the emotional state and the psyche of our patients, of ourselves, cannot be overstated enough. I think mind-body medicine is making a resurgence. It's almost like we're like, oh yeah, like our mind does play a role in our physiology. It's like quite very directly. It's like you're in a nervous state, you're in a sympathetic state. Well, guess what? Today in 2023, you're not running from a saber-toothed tiger, but you're constantly stressed, whether it's from the grief of a loved one, whether it's sitting in traffic, whether it's your career. So you're always in that sympathetic state. And so your body's machinery was designed that when you're in sympathetic state, you're in fight or flight. So your muscle, you can't see my body here, but your blood is being shunted to your extremities. It's going away from your GI tract because it's not a time to rest and digest and have a picnic. It's a time to run from the predator.
That's right.
In a modern day setting where we're chronically stressed, that blood is moving away from our GI tract, which is making our digestion, our absorption, our assimilation of nutrients a way less efficient process because the blood is not there. It's shunting to the extremities because we're in a constant state of sympathetic mode. And so it's like, whether it's having a good cry, whether it's having someone just sit in your office and have a moment to breathe, to reconnect, whether it's mind-body medicine, a hydrotherapy session, it's like, it's helping people reconnect to not just their body, but what's happening in the mind, what's happening in the heart. And I think the beauty of people getting to see a physician like you is like, you're almost like a little Sherlock Holmes. You're almost like, your change of job and your sleep patterns. Let me like connect this algorithm. Like, and you almost, as a physician, help patients in moving that line down, moving the line down, making more of
bringing that awareness. Conscious. I mean, that's even like knowing how many times a day, or if you have a poop every day, even, right? Like just bringing it back to basic bodily function. I'm not saying you need to like microscopically analyze your bowel movements every single day, but like, did I poop today? Okay. Did I poop 3 days ago? Shoot, I don't remember the last time I took a poop, right? It's like, those are common.
Like, did I sleep good?
Did I sleep well?
How do I feel in my body?
The watches,
How do I feel in the presence of this? How does this food make me feel? And it's like, when you're able to tap into these really physiological things like sleep and diet and exercise and how that feels in your body, you start getting it more in tune with yourself. And I think when you're able to be in tune with the physical body, when this physical body is good, when it's not in pain, when it's doing everything it should be normally, eliminating well, sleeping well, all that stuff, eating well, then you can kind of go up that hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah. I'm going to show it.
And you can start show them. Yeah, when you have those physiological needs met, when you feel safe, you can start moving up the pyramid to self-actualization.
Exactly, which is the top. And I really love getting to do work with patients here because my job isn't to keep seeing them. Okay, great. You've reversed your type 2 diabetes. Your blood sugars are stable for a person, appropriate for you, the individual. Great. I don't need to see you again. unless
Right.
something else happens. And that's the caveat I give them. It's not that I don't want to see them again. It's like, go spend your money doing something more fun. Go buy a new stand-up paddleboard and go teach yourself paddleboarding. Go, I oftentimes think about outside activities because that's what we do here in Colorado most often. But maybe, it's time for you to start a garden, or you were wanting to start this other project that you didn't have energy for previously that you now do.
You're healed, and now what? It's like there is no end, and the current capitalistic system will take advantage of this, but there is no end to supplements, to healing retreats, to medicine sessions, to naturopaths, to MDs, to holistic health programs. There is no end to sight. For as much desire as you have, there will be treatments you could take, but it's like at some point you're on the healing trajectory, and now what? And now what do you get to do? Now you get to build that garden. Now you get to start the family. Now you get to whatever. It's like fill it in. But you got to know yourself to know what that next goal is, or else, you're always just chasing your tail. You'll never fully feel.
We should talk about ways of knowing ourselves, because this is really interesting. And, I know there are problems with the different ways of like doing personality tests, and there's pros and cons to all of them. And I'm not married to any one idea. And what I really love is like, take what resonates with you and leave the rest. Like nothing is going to be exactly so, because we are not flat, superficial beings. We are very complex, nuanced creatures that have different life experiences depending on so many factors. And so things that come to my mind that have been really beneficial for me personally is learning what my Myers-Briggs was and my Enneagram. And
what's your Enneagram?
I'm an 8, the Challenger.
I can see that. I'm a 4.
Which is?
The Individualist.
See?
Makes sense.
What's interesting to me is my Enneagram kind of crosses over with my Myers-Briggs, which is the Commander, an ENTJ. And I'm very much on the like, let me be a leader, but I want to lead. And when you and I, we met each other when I was part of a naturopathic philosophical retreat that we put on every summer. And one of the ways... Shout out Revival, restore the V's. One of the ways I took my leadership role was, how do I give feedback to people? Because I'm a very direct communicator, and that hurts some people's feelings. And that's not my goal. My goal is to, how do I provide feedback to this person that gives them the most effective way that they can then grow? And so I invited people, if they wanted to take the Myers-Briggs. And I had a couple people that took me up on that. Not everybody, but a couple people that did. And it helped me be a better leader, so then I could provide the best feedback. And I got to see people grow in ways that I hadn't seen previously, because I didn't have that opportunity to create that like connection with them. It's like, oh, this person likes to, they don't like to hear bad news, but they want to hear how they did this thing. And, I learned about the sandwich method, tell them something positive. And like, there's all about the delivery. Like, I don't need to be like, oh, you didn't sweep, sweeping, and like, you didn't sweep the line and there's still a line of dirt. Like, I don't have to say it that way. It's like, hey, did you get a chance to finish sweeping that room? Like, I noticed that it was mostly cleaned up, the cat litter or whatever, right? Like, there's different ways that we can say things or deliver our treatment plans so that they land more effectively with the person that we're sitting with.
Yeah. Yeah. And the person who didn't fill out your survey or your questionnaire, that probably tells you about their Myers-Briggs.
Well, and I've learned those people that don't fill out their paperwork prior to, one, I now counsel them, and two, they're not committed. And like, I tell them, hey, take 15, 20 minutes, fill out your paperwork. Like, I review it advanced. I have seen some doctors that don't review it at all. They ask the same damn questions. It's like, why did you have me fill out the form if you're not going to review my form?
It's super helpful to know these, whether it's the Jungian archetypes, which I'm no expert at, or Enneagram types, or Myers-Briggs. I think it's really helpful in knowing how people communicate and how they observe the world and how they internalize the world. Like, I'm an Enneagram 4. When I found out that Enneagram 4s are a little bit emotional, a little bit intuitive, sensitive, they have this like desire for a romantic, mystical life, right? And so like, when I learned that, I was like, oh, that's why I feel things so deeply. Like, okay, that's why sometimes I feel consumed by these like ephemeral concepts. It's like, you know that, and it doesn't put you in a box, but it shows you your way out of it almost.
Exactly.
And I think in knowing, from a clinical perspective, knowing what our patients' dispositions are, whether that's homeopathic constitutions, Enneagrams, Myers-Briggs, Jungian archetypes, astrology, science, whatever, they're all the same.
So many ways. They're the same.
There's so many overlaps.
Mm-hmm.
It helps you understand how they view reality in a really important way. So you have a patient who's a Enneagram 1, and Enneagram 1, there's a right and there's a wrong way, and there's logic and there's order. So a patient like that, you better believe that when you give them a treatment plan, you got to give them specific dosages, maybe add some research articles, tell them how long they're going to take this for, when to fall. They need that regimen. Versus like Enneagram 4, you might have to say, all right, take these for a couple weeks, see how it feels in your body, what's the visceral sensation, and then come back when you feel like you're ready to fall. It's just like, in knowing these things, if you put me in a like boxed thing, I'm going to be like, this is not the right treatment plan for me. I might not take it at all if I feel like it's not the right match for me. I have to be an individual. So in knowing people's archetypes or constitutions, you can relate to them better in a way that can improve outcomes, I think.
Definitely. Like relating to someone on that level. And one of the things that stood out to me about our preparatory conversation a couple weeks ago was when we are sitting with patients, if we can maintain kind of like a stoic approach, not that we're emotionless, but like we're really listening and taking in the patient's essence, the person sitting in front of us that's coming for care. It helps us to listen not only to auditory, but also nonverbal cues too, because they could be, one of the keynotes for an herb agrimony is smiling on the outside, but like the story they're telling you, I'm like, why is this person smiling right now? Like, this is awful, their experience. And
that's an incongruence.
It's
that's
so incongruent. And I'm like, you look like you're about to pass out from the amount of pain you're in, but you're laughing and like, it's not a big deal. And, I get like, we normalize our experience. Like, hey, I've been dealing with this thing for 20 years. It just is how it is. But when a person looks ghastly, like they're about to pass out from pain and they're smiling, that's an interesting observation to make.
Absolutely. From the moment a patient comes in and they're in the waiting room and they're filling out their patient paperwork, I'll kind of walk by. They don't know me yet. They might not know what I look like. I look by, I observe them. I see what's their state. How did they just come out from the external world into the waiting room? Are they late? Are they quickly filling out paperwork? Are they early, filling it out, enjoying it, excited? And then when they walk from the patient room to my clinic room, how are they walking? What's their gait? Are they happy? Are they moving through the world with confidence? Is there some musculoskeletal imbalance? Their hip is off. They have a staggered gait. All of that. When they sit, how do they meet a new person? Are they in a shell? Are they bubbly? How do they say their story? Sometimes patients like they have a nervous laugh, and it's not a judgment, but it's like, oh, what was that? And I might not. And we don't have to say all these things to a patient, but I'm always observing people, whether it's my clinic or not, because I think it's all data points to kind of tell me, who is this person,
what's going on with them that they may not be consciously aware of.
Exactly. Come back to that line.
That's our job, is to help bring that awareness. And, as an ENTJ, in my Myers-Briggs, I'm pretty even on all of them except for J. I'm pretty much 100%.
What's the J?
Judging. And I have been told many times in my life that I am a judgmental. And you know what? Knowing this and understanding this about myself, I can be judgmental. But my judgment, in my opinion, I would make a good emergency room physician. You know why? Because you have to be able to come to quick judgments. Is this person in good shape or are they in bad shape? Do they need immediate care? Do they need care in 3 days? Like, having discernment, and that's a word that I tried to use instead of judgment because there's so much negativity associated with judgment. I want to be discerning as a doctor. I want to be able to judge and assess a situation very quickly, so I know what I'm dealing with. And sometimes I can be wrong, and it's good to have a humble approach and have a little humility, but also knowing that about myself. Like, when someone's then like, oh, you're a judgmental, I'm like, cool. That's fine with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that you need to somehow edit that or filter that out based on the person who's in front of you? Or do you think that we should all just be our truest, rawest form and people should
Ooh.
accept us how we are?
Yes and no. Like, I think having a filter can be very beneficial. Knowing your audience, like going to some
Yes.
psychological understanding. It's like, does this person I'm sitting with need to know that I have this component of myself? Not necessarily. Like, is it helpful? Is it, what is that? There's like an acronym that goes like, do I need to say what I need to say? And as someone that like really identifies with like honesty and truth, and knowing my truth is not the same as everybody else's truth, and my opinions are not for everybody to know. Like, that's part of filtering and like learning how to move through the world in a way that feels congruent and useful. Like, do I need to go through the world talking about like big pharma, this, that, and the other thing? And, you just got to take out the trash. Like, it gets bogged down in the details. You know what I mean? Like, there's a time and a place. And I'm not saying I'm not being my true self. I'm just being, an appropriate level depending on where I'm at.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a time and there's a seasonality of when to further cultivate those like burning, strong feelings. There's a time to express it. There's a time to write a book about it. There's seasons and times and places to doing it. And I think wisdom is being able to differentiate,
Exactly. Wisdom is
That's a
being
really
able to differentiate, and sitting there with someone like, hey, they need to hear that I've been through something similar. Like, can I share this? Because that was something you and I chatted about, is like, how do we know when is it appropriate to share something a little bit personal? Because I think that that's part of the benefit, is like you get a human interaction when you come to see a naturopathic doctor. You don't just get this 7 minutes, I'm not going to look up from a clipboard, and like, who cares? Like, there's,
yeah.
what's the essence of what's going on in this visit that like this
Right.
person needs to hear? Like, hey, I'm hearing that you had an abortion 30 years ago and it's still causing you a lot of like internal conflict. Like, let me share this experience I've had with this. Like, and it lands in a way that feels soothing and helpful to that person. And there are other times that it doesn't.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think we will retain a patient population that's similar to our wavelength of
Exactly.
what our essence is what that patient needs. And in that way, it's almost like a spiritual connection. It's like there's the patient, there's the physician, but then there's like the container where the healing, they say it's the healing entity. It's like something greater than the sum of its parts happens. And that depends on the archetypes of the two people. It's like I've had some mentors who had really intense, strong personalities. And like when they walked into the clinic, it was their time to shine. And everybody would come like to see them for their expertise. And they really valued that confidence and that like panache they had. And I think that the patient populations that were attracted to those types of clinicians were a little bit more soft. They needed someone strong and confident, because it worked, it was the unpaired electron. It was like attracted something that helped it feel stabilized. And I've had other clinician mentors who it was like tabula rasa. It was like a blank slate. You walked in and it was not about them. They like camouflaged into the background, and it was just about you and your essence. And it was all about the patient. And so that attracts a different kind of patient too.
It does. So we're going to wrap up here. God, I feel like by the time we get to the hour, it's like, we just diving into the goodness. But I want to kind of summarize for our listeners the importance of the therapeutic relationship, which is the term where we sit with our patients and are understanding them. We're trying to understand their story, all the different components that are going into their potentially complex case. And it can be simple. It can just be a simple case of constipation, right? And understanding this connection to ourself, our unconscious, our subconscious self, that we are then trying to help bring awareness to, so that we can bring these things to light and we can start changing them.
Can I ask you one quick question, Jana? Because I feel like you asked me and I don't know that we ever answered it, but the question was, how do you know yourself?
That's a big question. And I feel like
I not have time for it, but
we might not have time for it, but I feel like
new.
I know myself, because when I'm sitting in a room alone, which I do often, or, you know, spending time cooking is one of the ways I find most beneficial for myself to feel grounded. Like, what do I feel like in this moment while I'm cooking? Like, oh, I feel a little like muscle tension. Like, I spend time listening and paying attention to me. And I think our culture, our community has gotten to the point where, like, when we do that, we are then considered selfish. And first is you, is me, and then everybody else. And it's not because I'm better than everybody else. It's because if I'm not here, if I don't take care of me, if my patients don't take care of themselves before their kids and their husband and their everybody else, they don't exist. There's nothing left. They will die, and there's no one that will care. Like, I know that sounds like a little bit yucky, but it's kind of true. All right. We'll have to, we got to wrap up here.
Back.
So we've talked about some energetics and the essence and the philosophy of naturopathic medicine, where the nature is. And I really want to make sure that you guys have the ability to stay in contact with Dr. Sahar if you want to. So Sahar, what's your contact? What's the best way for people to stay in communication if they'd like to?
Yeah, you can go to my website, naghibinaturopathic.com. That's NAGHIBI, naghibinaturopathic.com. And my contact info and email is on there as well.
Awesome. I'll make sure to link that in the show notes. Thank you so much, everybody. And, you know, we're going to talk about a Medscape article for our next episode, and what that Medscape article is discussing as far as lifestyle and insurance benefits. So we'll talk about that. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.